Evening with a Legend is a series of presentations exclusive to legends of the famous 24 Hours of Le Mans, giving us an opportunity to bring a piece of Le Mans to you. By sharing stories and highlights of the big event, you get a chance to become part of the legend of Le Mans with guests from different eras of over 100 years of racing.
Please stay tuned to the end of this presentation for additional information that pertains to the contents of this episode from our sponsors, The Motor Chain and CARnection Advisors. Tonight, we have an opportunity to bring a piece of Le Mans to you, sharing in the legend of Le Mans with guests from different eras of over 100 years of racing. And as your host, I'm delighted to introduce not a driver, but a unique car, the Camaradi USA Racing's 1960 Corvette. It was built for international competition under the auspices of Chevrolet General Manager Ed Cole and Chief Engineer Zora Duntov. It went on to race successfully in Havana, Daytona, Sebring, the Nürburgring, Sweden, and at Le Mans. The only thing more amazing than this car's creation and its race record is its survival. On the way to Britain's famed Goodwood circuit in August of 1960, it was crashed hard and left for dead. But miraculously, the shattered remains were preserved and discovered some 30 years later by Loren Lundberg. And tonight, we have a panel here to talk about the Camoradi Corvette's history. This includes Richard Prince, author and official photographer for the GM Corvette race team, Dominic Testa, the current owner of the car, and Chuck Schroedel, who is a member of the Camoradi team at Le Mans in 1960. And with that, I'm your host, Crew Chief Eric from the Motoring Podcast Network, welcoming everyone to this Evening with a Legend. And with that, gentlemen, welcome to the show.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
How are you, Eric?
Let me just start by saying thank you to the International Motor Racing Research Center in Watkins Glen and to the ACO for supporting us and making this evening possible.
Take us back to 1960. And if I recall, this story starts with a gentleman named Lloyd Lucky Kastner. And it's a story about how the team sort of came together in a not so orthodox way. Richard, why don't you kick us off and kind of bring us up to speed about the Camoradi Corvette?
Yeah, Lloyd Lucky Kastner was one of those epic characters who cut his own path in life. Some would describe him as one of the world's great con men. He was a racing enthusiast and had big dreams about racing around the world in the biggest sports car racing events, including, of course, the 24 Hours of Le Mans. He just didn't have the funds to do it, but he had a gift for convincing other people to bend to his will and support his racing, and that's exactly what he did. He formed Camaradi, which was an acronym or a conglomeration. It stood for Kastner Motor Racing Research Division. Formed a team. He invited anybody and everybody who wanted to pitch in a little bit of money to join his team. Was off and running in 1960 with a pair of Corvettes that he intended to take to Europe and, again, racing the biggest races of the season, including Le Mans.
Memory serves, there were two Camaradi Corvettes and only one remains. What happened to number 5?
Well, that's an interesting but a sad story. Both cars were built together. They were equally equipped with all of the road racing options that Chevrolet then offered, as well as a few special components that Chevrolet engineering supplied to the top-level racers of the era. Both cars went to Sebring. They had a star driver lineup led by Jim Jeffords, who was a national champion and one of the best road racers of his era. Jim Jeffords' car, one of the Camaradi Corvettes, got damaged early in the race. It was probably over-revved, and it had likely some valve train damage that prevented it from revving past 5,000 RPM. The other car was being driven by Fred Gamble, who was the team manager, and he wasn't even slated to drive there. He was on the entry list. He put himself down on the entry list because he was the team manager. He told me he did that just for a laugh, just so his name would appear in the program and he could send a copy home to his family. But one of the team's contracted drivers, a guy named Skip Hudson, failed to show. And instead of withdrawing the car, they said, well, you're on the entry list. Go ahead and drive it. Fred started the race. He had never turned a practice lap at Sebring, never, ever drove the course. He just got in the car at the start and went. Within an hour, he was called in because, again, Jim Jeffords' car had some engine damage. Much to his dismay, he was ordered to give the car up to Jim Jeffords. Lee Lilly, the team's head mechanic, said to Fred, seeing how dejected he was, well, the other car's still running. If you want to get in it and, kind of lumber around until the engine blows up, be my guest. So Fred got in that car, and ultimately, after 12 hours, he entered the history books as one of only 2 drivers to ever complete the 12 hours of Sebring driving all by himself. He respected a self-imposed low red line to keep the engine alive, managed to actually turn some respectable laps. Toward the end, he lost gears 1 through 3 in the transmission. So he finished the race with a damaged engine and a damaged transmission, but finish it indeed. One of the problems the car had toward the end was a fuel line broke. As it was effectively a production car, they were able to borrow a fuel line from a car that was parked in the spectator area. They installed that. It cost quite a bit of time, but it worked, and the car finished the race. When it finished, they returned that fuel line to the man who owned it. And unfortunately, the next morning, one of the team's mechanics got in that car, the car that Fred had driven solo for the entire 12 hours. He got in it, tried to start it to move it, not knowing the fuel line was missing. Fuel sprayed all over the place, and there was an ignition source. The car caught fire, and unfortunately, it burned to the ground. After Sebring, the Camoradi Corvette team was comprised of only 1 car, and that's the car that we're talking about here this evening.
Number 4 was not the first Corvette ever entered at Le Mans. And even when it was at Le Mans, it was partnered with the Cunningham Corvettes and similarly prepared. Its significance is that it was one of the few Corvettes to ever finish the race. So what was Corvette's track record up until that point, up until Camaradi and Cunningham showed up in 1960?
By the mid-1950s, by 1956, Corvette was already establishing a reputation as a force to be reckoned with in production class sports car racing. The first serious effort was at Sebring in 56. 4-car team led by John Fitch was entered there, and they came away with 2 class wins. That really launched Corvette's success in production class sports car racing, and it just grew from there. 1960 was actually the first time that Corvettes appeared at Le Mans. So the 4 cars, the 3 Cunningham cars and the Camaradi car, marked Corvette's first appearance at Le Mans.
Dominic, since you have the car and it's gone through its restoration, one of our audience members asked ahead of time if you could discuss the engine, the car's modifications from stock, estimated power levels, any other details about the setup of the Camaradi Corvette, and if there were any differences you've discovered between it and the Cunningham cars.
That car raced in the GT class, so they were essentially production cars with a few modifications, such as there was some other seat belts added, there was a roll bar. The engine and the fuel injection, from what I understand, is essentially what would have been available on a production vehicle. Now, the one big difference was during testing, and I think they test at that track in April, they determined that the big tank that was optioned with that car didn't make the required number of laps with the capacity that was in that tank. So Chevrolet had to come up with some way to get it so that it would make it to the next fueling. That car has a 37-gallon tank. You can see where they molded in to the tank an extra part of the tank to increase the capacity. And that was one of the things after the car was wrecked and it was found in Sweden. They knew it was something special because nobody had ever seen a fuel tank like that before. And we do have some production work orders and things from Chevrolet where they were told to create these extra capacity tanks. Other than that, essentially, it's a production car.
Springs, shocks, brakes, all those kinds of things are the same as the production Corvette at the time?
It was the big brake, heavy suspension options that would have been available to anybody that ordered those items.
And power output of the motor, that was a V8 at that point. They had gotten rid of the 6-cylinder.
Yeah, 283, and they call it 290 horsepower. There may have been, some other modifications done to the engine that weren't disclosed or whatever, in a number of conversations with Fred Gamble. He never really said one way or the other. At that point, they were called 283 290s, fuel injected.
Have you ever had the car weighed? How much does a C1 race prepped car weigh?
That car weighs about 2,800 pounds.
Okay. It's a pretty decent power to weight ratio for 1960. What was the Camoradi Corvette stacked up against at that time? I mean, not just the Cunningham cars.
Well, I think that had something to do, and Richard probably would know this better. It had something to do with the way they were numbered. I believe it was either cubic inches or horsepower relative to the weight, and that's how they ended up with 1, 2, 3, and 4 because they were the largest cubic inch and heaviest cars.
The engine displacement was the single most important variable back then in how the cars were classified. So the Corvette didn't actually have a lot of competitors because there were very few sports cars in the world at that time that had relatively large displacement V8 engines.
But there were much larger, let's say, Ferraris with V12s and things like that. Because thinking about like the Mille Miglia, the way they numbered the cars then, that was about their starting time. Like 451 is when you took off, from Brescia and then did the race. So that's really interesting that Le Mans incorporated a similar system in the car numbering based on power to weight. That's actually really cool. That's a very interesting bit of history there that I don't think many of us probably knew. You talked about who drove the car at Sebring leading up to Le Mans and the other races that it did, like the Nürburgring and so on. And we've heard in previous conversations about the race in Havana and its significance and things like that. The Camaradi Corvette had a multitude of different drivers. Who drove the car at Le Mans?
At Le Mans was Fred Gamble and Lee Lilly, and they were the drivers at Le Mans.
So two guys drove for 24 hours. That's got to be absolutely exhausting. Nowadays, we do that with 4 drivers on many of the teams, minimum drive times and all those kinds of things. Who drove the longest out of the two of them? Was it Fred? Because of Sebring, he was so used to it?
I had an opportunity to speak with Fred a number of times on the telephone, and I never asked him that. And that's a really good question, and it never came up in a conversation. I never really thought about that.
Now, with the larger fuel tank, how often did they have to stop? Do you have any idea how long they could go with that special fuel tank that they designed for the car?
They're allowed to stop every 25 laps to add fluids. The way the car was originally set up, it didn't make the 25 laps. That's when they added the extra capacity to the tank so that they would be able to get to the next point where they could refuel.
Do you have any idea of what their lap times were like? How close were Fred and Lee Lilly in terms of, their consistency?
Most of the conversations with Fred at the time that we spoke was about 90. He passed away this past March at 92. He liked telling stories. He really enjoyed talking about some of the antics that went on back in the time. And I don't know if it was because he didn't remember a lot of the details or just enjoyed speaking about, the camaraderie and that kind of stuff. But the lap times and stuff like that in comparison between Fred and Lee, that it never really came up. There is a lot of documentation that's available from that race. And with a little bit of research, we probably could figure it out. Right now, I don't know what the answer to that is.
Well, we know they placed 10th overall, which, it's not podium, but it's nothing to sneeze at either for basically a self-made team with some sketchy sponsorship, as Richard has alluded to in previous conversations. So I'd say that's a fair finish, regardless of lap times or otherwise, right? Something to be proud of.
Right. The number 3 Cunningham car won the GT class and came in 8th overall. The Camaradi number 4 car came in 2 places behind, 10th. So it was the second place GT finisher of the 4 cars. The 1 car went out at about lap 20, and the 2 car went out at about lap 200. The Camaradi car did the entire 24 hours and completed 275 laps.
You mentioned the antics of being there in 1960 and talking to someone who was there. Well, let's turn to Chuck Schroedel for a moment, somebody who was there, somebody who was in the pits with the car. Chuck, tell us how you went about getting involved in all this. How did you go from fan to spectator, enthusiast to suddenly finding yourself in the pits?
Well, first of all, I can't believe it's 64 years ago this all happened. And thanks to Dom, this has kind of reopened a lot of my past. I hadn't thought about Le Mans until I got that very first call from Loren Lundberg saying, "Are you Chuck Schroedel that was at Le Mans, etc.?" And I said, yes. And he told me what he was doing. And he actually called me and wrote me letters, sent me pictures of the finished product. But the way I got involved at Le Mans, I went into the military in 1958 as an MP, and I ended up being shipped to Orléans. At that particular point, my dream was to become a racer of motorcycles, because I had started in high school with Triumph Thunderbirds, thanks to the movie with Marlon Brando, etc. On duty in the sedan, I pulled the colonel over who was driving a 56 Corvette. And I walked up to the car, I popped my salute, and he looked up, he said, What did I do? What did I do? And I said, Colonel, you didn't do anything. I'm just curious. Would you be interested in selling your car? And he said, well, as a matter of fact, I would, because I just remarried and I inherited 2 kids. And there's not room in this car for 2 kids. 3 weeks later, I owned the car. And the car actually started its life at a dealership in North Carolina owned by his brother. So I got a 1956 Corvette that had the 2 4-barrels, Maori ignition, twin point in the distributor. And that got me started into cars. And the very first event that I went to was only a 1-day deal in April. I bought the car in 59. Le Mans had already passed. Rennes, France had already passed. So I had one event the next spring to go to, which was the test session in April. One of the first people I bumped into was Briggs Cunningham, ginned up a conversation, etc. And they were kidding, saying, well, you know, if we blow one of these engines, we can always take this one. And one of the head mechanics says, Briggs, it's a 256. It's not a 283. So that got a laugh. So I hung with them for the day and did gopher stuff like I did with Camaradi. Well, when the day was over, Briggs wanted to give me a set of racing tires. And of course, the traveling secretary said, no, we can't do that because of import taxes, etc. What we came into the country with, we have to leave with. So I lost my chance there for getting a set of racing tires. So time passed to June, and I went to Le Mans. The first people I bumped into was Camaradi. And the first real person I bumped into was a guy named Ed Van Hoef, H-O-E-F. He was the former president of the Corvette Club. And at that point, he made me an honorary member of the Corvette Club. He gave me a badge and a deal for my jacket. So now we're getting closer to Camaradi, etc. He said, listen, I know what you're doing. You're kind of working with Camaradi. Would you do us one favor? And I have a picture of him. The French photographer had done the movie Gigi in 1958. And he wanted to film the track. They said, could you take him around in your Corvette? I said, well, we could put him in the trunk, but why don't we take the hardtop off and he can stand up and take all the pictures he wants. If he wants to be closer to the ground, he can sit in the trunk. And having a 56 Corvette at Le Mans in 1960 is almost like having a pass. You don't have to tell anybody anything. Because if you come in and you say, well, I'm with the Camaradi team, they, oh, fine, go ahead. So at that particular point is when I kind of became a gopher for Camaradi. And the names of the drivers in 1960, they weren't anybody really big back then, but just to name a few of what I was exposed to as a soldier being stationed there. Olivier Jeanabien, believe it or not, Jimmy Clark was driving. He was driving an Aston Martin. John Fitch, and we all know that name. Lee Lilly and Gamble, I met both of them. I was a little bit closer to Fred Gamble. And as it turns out, and I found about this later, because we ended up palling around together for a while. And then when I got out of the Army, I went to the University of Florida. Well, it turns out that's where Fred Gamble went to school. And a lot of the professors were asking me, you seem to be very interested in racing. We had a fella here by the name of Fred Gamble that was also very interested in racing. Well, that was before I had met him. So the two of us never got a chance to talk before he passed away, but I know we had the same professors. Some of the other drivers that I was able to stand next to and listen to, like Richie Ginther, Jacques Bagnier, Graham Hill, I just noted a few, and most of you people have heard of them. Dan Gurney, Walt Hanskin, and he was driving the Cunningham. And as it turns out, as an MP in Orléans, part of our responsibility was the Army Hospital at La Chapelle in France. And that's where they brought Walt Hanskin after he had the terrible accident in a later April test session at Le Mans. And he passed away. And he passed away in the same ward that I was on my back for 16 days. So I kind of felt a closeness to Walt Hanskin. And then Chuck Day and Masson Gregory, Trintignant, Hans Harriman, all these guys were driving in the 1960 Le Mans. It was all new to me. The first thing I did when I got to France was I bought a cheap plastic Philips camera. And I love taking pictures. Well, I've got lots of pictures. They're mostly black and white. And one of the first pictures that I took was of the Camoradi Corvette with an AC Bristol behind it, which later became the Cobra, as we all know. And right across the way, you could see the other side of the retaining wall where the big accident in 1955 took place with Pierre Levesque. One of the officials took me over there and gave me a tour of that area. And I can remember that vaguely in 55 when it happened. As far as my duties with the Corvette goes, I can honestly tell you that I drove the Corvette at Le Mans. be it only in reverse and first. And the people in the pits and the crews saw my Corvette, so they knew that I could drive a Corvette. So they say, Chuck, pull the car up a little bit. So I get in and start it. All right, back it up. Now pull it in over here, which I would do. So I could say I did drive it. And as Dom says when we show the car, he's the only living person, that's a heck of a testimony, that drove this car at Le Mans. And I'll just add one other little detail. I was kind of a gopher. I'd go get lunch. I'd get parts. We need this, we need that. And one of the tasks that I was asked to do with another mechanic, we had to set up lights on the two doors, the hood, and the trunk, because they were not aware of the fact that those numbers had to be lit. That was one of the things I got very involved with. We found the wiring and the lights. I think we got the lights from another team because they had multiple lights. It was things like that that I would do.
What drove you to go visit Le Mans? You know, for those of us thinking about it today, maybe we've been there once and we check that off our bucket list. Maybe it's still a bucket list item. Why was Le Mans so important to you as an enthusiast? What made you want to go there and see the racing firsthand? And when you got there, what were your first impressions of the track and the facilities and of Le Mans in general?
The Super Bowl in Europe at that time is Le Mans. And I was interested in sports cars. I got the old Sports Cars Illustrated magazine. I would read about it. Part of the problem in 1959, I got mono when I was in the Army. And I was on my back, I told you, in La Chapelle at the hospital where Walt Hanskin died. And I was on my back for 16 days, fed intravenously, etc. And my biggest disappointment, it was in June, and I couldn't go to the race. So when I recovered and stood up in bed, they said, well, you've earned 2 weeks vacation out of this. You can do anything you want. Well, that lined up with Rennes, France. So I wasn't able to see the Aston Martin win Le Mans in 1959, but I went to Formula One race in France and really began to meet a lot of the drivers, etc. And I realized I don't want motorcycles anymore. I want to drive race cars. And I hooked up, believe it or not, with people like Phil Hill. They were terrific. So that really got me started. I said, well, boy, I'm going to go to Le Mans next year with my Corvette, which I did. Everybody talks about Le Mans in France. When I got there, I was just overwhelmed to see the names and see the faces of people that I had been reading about. When I ended up with Camaradi, and we started in town, in Le Mans, at a garage they had rented. And that's where we were doing all the work before we went out to the track. You asked me, how did I get involved in the different races? Well, I'd go to the race with my Corvette. Montfleury was a big oval right near Paris, and that was kind of the Indianapolis of its day. And I got to go to the races there, and that's the first time that I saw formula cars, etc., which I ended up racing. As some of you know, my last race was a NASCAR race at Watkins Glen in August of 1987, and that ended my career. But most of my racing was done in a single-seater in formula cars, in Brabhams. The thing that really ended my racing career, we started a business called Springdale Racing, and we were the March distributor. The customers would go racing, and I wouldn't. And so that didn't work out too good. But anyway, I did a lot of racing, and so that's my story there.
I got one more question for you about the
Please.
good old days of Le Mans. A lot of us try to look back through the lens of time, and a great way to depict what it was like is going to watch Steve McQueen's movie Le Mans, because it's a bit of a snapshot of what it was like in those days. I'm sure you've seen the movie like all of us have. Is that accurate? You know, were the pits, the way they showed it, kind of dark and dank and dingy and, you know, all these kinds of things? And Le Mans stayed that way for a long time, as we come to understand. What was it like? I've heard you tell this one other story about the Mulsanne corner at the end of the straightaway, that every car was required to have a shovel.
That's correct. That's correct. And I have pictures from my Philips camera. I'm looking at one of the pictures now of our pit setup at the end of the Mulsanne Straight. And when you go from flat out, it was maybe 8 miles, 7 miles long, the straightaway. And you could, obviously, it was constant sounds. I never slept. I stayed awake for the whole 24 hours with the boards. And we were pitting next to the Camaradi Maserati team. So I would be sitting on the pit wall. It's a walk from where I was, like the center field in a baseball stadium, is where the sand banks were. And the cars would go in too fast, go wide, and into the sand. And they'd get their shovel out and dig themselves out. I do have pictures of our pits, and Maserati pit had a table set up with a tablecloth and food, etc. So all I was supposed to do was we would get the messages on the telephone on times, what to flash, etc. And that's what my job was. I wanted it. I stayed right there the whole time. Very noisy, very noisy.
So, Richard, he brought up a little nugget of information that I wasn't aware of. There was a Camaradi Maserati team at the same time. How did that deal work out?
Yeah, 3 cars.
Lucky Kastner had no personal affinity for Corvette in particular. He ended up with the Corvettes because he connected with Fred Gamble at an SCCA race at Okalaka Naval Air Base in Florida. Fred Gamble kind of partnered with Kastner. Fred wrote a proposal, which he polished over a span of a couple of weeks to kind of get Camaradi going. It was a proposal in search of sponsorship. Fred conceived, as his presentation evolved, that they should have sort of an American theme. He kind of envisioned it as analogous to the Olympics. An American team would field largely American drivers in an American car. The first big sponsor they secured was Goodyear, and that led to Chevrolet and the Corvette. But Lucky Kastner had no particular attachment to Corvette and was interested in racing for overall wins in addition to class wins, was quite fond of pretty much anything that was fast. And the timing happened to be right for him. Maserati was struggling, were near bankruptcy or about to enter bankruptcy, were struggling to field cars and to build cars and to even survive as a company. And they were looking for a capable team to represent them, but they didn't have a lot of money because they were struggling financially. They ended up connecting with Lucky Kastner and Camaradi, and he became, in addition to racing the Corvettes, he became at the same time the de facto works operation for Maserati. So at the same time, I think just about all of the races in the 1960 season, they were fielding the Corvette. They were also fielding typically more than one, but at least one Maserati in the sports racing class or prototype class for the overall win. So yeah, the Maseratis were a big part of Camaradi's operation.
So, Chuck, did you ever get to meet the illustrious Lloyd Lucky Kastner?
Oh, sure. The drivers for the Maseratis were Lucky Kastner and Jim Jeffords. They drove the number 25. And the 24 was Maston Gregory and Chuck Day. And Chuck Day remembered me in the Corvette from Le Mans. And he was also driving the Scarab when we got to Rennes, France. So that's why we kind of became friendly, because he remembered me from Le Mans.
I remember very clearly asking Fred Gamble, did he refer to Kastner as Lloyd or Lucky? And he said, well, Lucky, of course. I thought that was kind of interesting. And I said, well, what was he like? And he referred to him as a bamboozling flim-flam artist.
Absolutely.
He was able to convince Dow Chemical, which is a antifreeze manufacturer, to sponsor his air-cooled Porsches. Fred used to laugh about it, and he would say that he could sell anything to anybody. But he would also say that it was impossible not to like him, and it was impossible to say no to him. He's an epic character, and I'm so fascinated in the whole story of Lloyd Lucky Kastner. And one of the last times that Fred and I spoke, I asked him where Lucky came from. You know, where did the nickname come from? And to the best of his recollection, when Lloyd was a young man, he got into some trouble or whatever, and his parents sent him away to military school. Got in trouble in military school, and he ended up having to do the overnight watch during the Christmas, New Year's break one year. Some students that he was in school with, joking around, said, well, aren't you lucky? He liked the way it sounded, and he actually adopted it himself. He gave himself the nickname Lucky Kastner. So even at whatever, 13 or 14 or 15 years old, whatever he was in military school, it was already the start of something big with him. He latched right onto that Lucky Kastner thing, and he just took it for all it was worth.
And to be honest with you, the number 26 Maserati, Scarlatti is one of the drivers, and Monoroon, and I didn't know either of those people. But yes, you know, at that age, I was only like 22. I was just having a ball. And a lot of these faces and people didn't mean a lot to me at that point. And the name Lucky Kastner was not a big draw for me. I knew he was basically the owner of the team. He certainly was very, very involved.
Sterling Moss and Lloyd Kastner in 1961 won the Nürburgring 1000 km in a Maserati Tipo 61.
That's true.
Later that year, in 1961, In that same car, Lloyd Kastner crashed the car at Pescara Grand Prix. He actually suffered some third-degree burns after that crash.
Correct.
In April of 1965, Lloyd Kastner was driving, I think it was called a T-151. It was a modified Maserati. He crashed at about 160 miles an hour, and that's ultimately ended Lloyd Kastner at 36 years old. He crashed that Maserati.
It was on the Mulsanne Straight.
Yeah, died from the injuries of that crash.
Talking about the speed of the Mulsanne, 165 miles an hour in the Maserati. I thought about this before when Chuck was talking about the racing at that time. How fast was the Camoradi Corvette down the straightaway at top speed?
Oh, geez.
Actually, it's recorded. The average speed in that race was 98 point something miles per hour.
That's the average lap speed. What's its recorded top speed?
134, I believe.
Okay. Leading right into that, Dominic, tell us what it's like owning a piece of Le Mans history.
As Richard alluded to in the very beginning of our talk, epic characters that are involved in this whole story. It just goes beyond anything that I had ever thought about. I first got involved in the car because I thought it was a cool race car, and I heard a little bit about the story, and it just seemed like a good thing to do at the time. But after really digging into some of the people that were involved and having the ability to speak on a number of occasions with Fred Gamble, who was part of the Camaradi race team ownership and a driver and a journalist. And he went on to do so many more things. He went on to become Goodyear's first director of international race car operations. Very prolific writer, wrote magazine articles and technical bulletins and things like that. It's interesting that as Lloyd Kastner continued racing, and at one point, Maston Gregory, Dan Gurney, Carroll Shelby, Sterling Moss, the list goes on and on and on. He just couldn't hold it together, which is part of what's so interesting about it. He had this great idea, and him and Fred Gamble had this idea of this Olympic team. They just couldn't hold it all together. So one by one, all these notable figures, they would come and go. In around 1963, when Fred Gamble finally divorced himself from Camaradi, he ended up at a journalist luncheon, and he runs into Carroll Shelby. And before Fred went to work for Goodyear, Carroll Shelby made him his first sales manager.
The small world.
Yeah, small world, illustrious career. That's Chuck sitting in the Camoradi Corvette in the pits at Le Mans. You can see there's a camera in the lower right-hand side there. That's somebody from the Chevrolet film crew was taking pictures. There's a great video narrated by Dr. Dick Thompson all about that 1960 race. And standing in the back is Bob Wallace and John Olsen. These were two guys from New Zealand. Bob Wallace went on to a great career with Lamborghini, and John Olsen is credited with building with Carroll Shelby the first Daytona Coupe. And these two gentlemen from New Zealand both were part of the Camaradi team at Le Mans.
So I got a question for Chuck as you go through these pictures, kind of looking back at that one of him in the car. At that time, 1960, how were Americans received at Le Mans? What was it like being with an American car there? Today it's accepted. Corvette is part of the landscape along with other vehicles, especially last year, Ford back on the scene at Le Mans. What was it like to be there with Corvette? Is it sort of like Garage 56 where everybody was sort of raising their eyebrow going, I don't think they're going to make it? What was the vibe like at that time?
More eyes would open wide when I'd be in my 56 Corvette. For them to see a Corvette, that was like, what the hell is that? I really honestly spent the whole race, the end of the Mulsanne Straight, in the rain, etc. And I didn't really get a feel. I didn't notice anything in particular about the way they felt about the American team. I just thought that we showed ourselves very, very well. We were polite. And I loved my 2 years in France. I had no problem. It was a dream come true just to be involved with that team at that time, because I had been reading about it all this time. So it was a thrill. It was a thrill.
So Richard, you talked a lot about Loren Lundberg and his quest to find the car, almost in a Don Quixote sort of way. What attracted him to the Camaradi Corvette? Was it its presence at Le Mans? Was it its finish? Was it the history? You analyzed a lot of his story. Can you share more about what drew him to try to find the car?
Dominic mentioned that a big part of his attraction to the car is the cast of larger-than-life characters that surround its story. And Loren Lundberg's right up there with Lloyd Lucky Kastner and Chuck and some of the other truly remarkable people. Loren was a super passionate Corvette enthusiast. He crossed paths with the car completely by accident. Dominic mentioned Bob Wallace, the New Zealander who was hired on as a mechanic for the team during the 1960 season. When the car was going from Sweden after the Swedish Grand Prix and after Joe Bonnier set some new Swedish national speed records on public roads with the car, it was next going to Great Britain, and it was driven from race to race. There was no trailer, no transporter, which I think was typical of the era. So Bob Wallace was driving the car, and it was he who crashed it in Sweden. Fred Gamble was in their support vehicle, a Ford station wagon. Oddly enough, Bob Wallace left Camaradi after the 60 season and went to work for a Ferrari team for the next 4 years. And then in 64, he went to work for Lamborghini, initially as a mechanic, and he was slated to do a little bit of test driving, but his skill and his acumen quickly led to his rise in the company. He became their chief test driver and was instrumental in every Lamborghini that the company produced for the next 10 years. When Ferruccio Lamborghini sold the company in 1975, Bob Wallace didn't want to stay on with the new owner. So he was from New Zealand. He had lived much of the past 15 or so years in Italy. He and his wife literally opened up a map book and decided that they were going to move to the United States, and they picked Phoenix, Arizona, because it was warm and because there was enough of a population there to support a business. He intended to open up an independent Ferrari and a Lamborghini repair and race prep shop. So he and his wife moved to Phoenix, and Loren Lundberg lived in Glendale, Arizona. He was 10 minutes from Bob Wallace's shop. By sheer coincidence, another Corvette enthusiast named Mike Pillsbury was on a phone call with Loren Lundberg, and Loren was trying to convince Mike to bring his car, one of the Cunningham team cars that Mike Pillsbury had found and restored, to a Southwest NCRS, National Corvette Restorer Society show. And in the course of the conversation, Mike Pillsbury said, "Hey, you're near Phoenix. You must know Bob Wallace." And Loren Lundberg said, "No, I don't know Bob Wallace." Mike Pillsbury told him, well, he was with the Camaradi team in 1960, and he was there at Le Mans with the car. Be an interesting guy. You ought to look him up. So that's what started Loren Lundberg's journey with the Camaradi car. He went and visited Bob Wallace. It was a combination of, he loved C1 Corvettes. He recognized the intrinsic interest and worth, and I don't mean financial worth, because for Loren, it was never about money. It was the historic value of a car that had not only competed at Le Mans, which in and of itself is remarkable for the time period, but a car that had actually finished Le Mans. So he instantly became fascinated with the car, and he wanted to know, where is it? What's happened to it? And Bob Wallace told him the sad story that he had crashed the car, it rolled several times and ended up a shattered mess. And Loren Lundberg didn't accept that it was just thrown away. Well, what happened to it? And Bob Wallace said, "We assumed it was scrap." And he pulled out a photo of the car, a crime scene photo from the wreck, showing exactly what the car looked like. It was an accident photo. Bob Wallace's attitude was, look at what was left of it. I'm sure it was, disposed of. And Loren Lundberg said, "But you don't know for sure, do you?" And Bob Wallace acknowledged that he didn't know for sure. He and Fred Gamble had taken what they deemed the only salvageable parts out of the car, which was the engine and transmission. And they gave the remains to the first Swedish policeman who had showed up at the accident scene. Their idea was, well, the car was sort of somewhat famous at that point because it had just completed the 24 hours of Le Mans, and it had just been driven by Bonnier, who was Sweden's first Formula One driver and first Formula One winner, to some national public road speed records. So their idea was the policeman was nice to them, and he could probably sell a few bits and pieces off the car as souvenirs before it went to the scrapyard. But he didn't know for sure. Loren Lundberg very quickly became obsessed. And again, I think it was his attachment to Corvettes, his fascination with Corvette history, and his recognition that a Le Mans finishing Corvette from that time period was truly a remarkable piece of machinery. And though extraordinarily remote. If in fact this car did survive, it was worth investigating and, if possible, acquiring it. After 5 years of pre-internet, old-fashioned, tenacious detective work with an incredible sequence of unrelated, incredibly intensely lucky coincidences, Loren found the car and he was able to buy it in 1995, 35 years after it left the United States. He shipped it back, and it came back to the West Coast, to the port of Long Beach.
That quest, that journey, the car gets fully restored. Dominic, you've got some pictures of it now. We've seen the pictures from the center conversation. It was on display at the IMRC. As Loren got older, like in a lot of cases, especially with collector cars, that enthusiast passes away and then the family goes, I don't know what to do with dad's cars or grandpa's cars or whatever. So it went up on the market. What drew you to the Camoradi Corvette? Was it the Le Mans story? Was it something else? Had you met Loren in the past, and was his excitement about it that drew you in? What made you decide you wanted to own a piece of Le Mans history?
I had never met Loren. Shortly before I actually saw the car in a NCRS Driveline ad for sale, I had watched a movie called The Quest. And The Quest was a movie all about the number 3 car and John Fitch and going back to Le Mans. And it just piqued my interest that a car like the number 4 car was up for sale. So I responded to the ad with the car for sale from that I saw the NCS Driveline. And at that point, Loren's family, just as you said, they didn't know what to do with the car. The car was in the garage. I spoke with his wife a couple of times. She advertised it, but she really didn't know what she wanted to do with it. So some time went by. Eventually, we hooked back up. Loren had passed away. She was selling the house that they lived in. And she called me on a Monday and she said, I'm moving out of the house on Friday. If you want the car, just make a reasonable offer. Now, I live in New York. The car was in Arizona. She said, come to Arizona. You have to be here by Friday. And the car has to be out of the garage by Friday because I'm vacating the house for the new owners to take possession that Saturday. Just so happened that it was Barrett Jackson that weekend. So I was able to find reliable, one of the car carriers that had a spot available to get the car back to New York. So I flew to Arizona to Loren's house, looked at the car carrier came and met us there. We made the deal, put the car in the car carrier, got back to New York. Funny story, we're in Loren's garage and there's the car. Speaking with his wife, and Loren's son actually came to the garage while we were there finishing the deal up. Mrs. Lundberg said to me, you bought the car and there's all this other stuff that's in the garage that belonged to Loren, and I don't know what any of it is, but if you don't take it, I'm going to throw it all out. I'm like, well, let me take a look at it and see what it is. I mean, I came for the car. I didn't really expect anything else. And there were file boxes of photographs and correspondences. It was that whole 5-year search that Richard was just referring to, all documented, thrown in these file boxes. Mrs. Lundberg's like, you're welcome to take it if you want it. Most of it, I didn't even know what I was looking at because I really honestly didn't know the extent of the story. I knew, about obviously the race, and I learned about the 4 cars that went to the race, but I really didn't have this whole backstory. So we're taking this paperwork and we're putting it inside the car to travel back to New York. The intake manifold was off the car and the fuel injection unit was in the trunk. We're filling up garbage bags and we're stuffing the engine compartment with garbage bags full of all this paperwork. Haphazardly, just everything that we could fit in the car, we fit in the car. So I get it back, and this is actually how I met Chuck. Now I got the car back and I have these boxes and boxes and boxes of paperwork, and it was, we just kind of threw it all together. It was in no particular order or anything like that. And what I would do is every day on my way to work is I would just grab a handful of stuff from the boxes and try and sort it into some kind of order, date order or subject order or whatever. And I mean, it was literally file boxes full of paperwork. And I'm going through this stuff one day and I see a handwritten note on the side of a letter from Loren to Chuck with a phone number. And it said Chuck Schroedel, a phone number, and the town that Chuck lived in, it said Bedford, New York. Now, my office is in Valhalla, New York, which is like 15 minutes away from Bedford, New York. And I'm like, how could this can't possibly be? And I mean, it just adds to this epic story of like the stuff that most of us not even believable. What's the worst that could happen? I dialed the number up, man answered the phone the way Chuck always answers the phone, Chuck Schroedel. And I'm like, excuse me, but are you Chuck Schroedel that had something to do with the Le Mans race in 1960 and a Camoradi Corvette? And he's like, yeah, that's me. What's it to you? And that was it. That started the whole thing. And I mean, ever since that day, Chuck and I, we probably talk at least once a week, or sometimes a couple, a couple of times a week. And we've become great friends, and just another one of the epic characters that go with the Camaradi story.
Dom, one of the amazing things here is when you called, that call was separated by a number of years from the same call I got from Loren. And I was stunned. I said, you have to be kidding. I just went through this. And then when you explained the story, subsequently, you brought the car to a show in Armonk, which is like 5 minutes from my house.
Yeah.
When I saw the car, I had a hard time. I couldn't believe it.
Yeah, that picture that I have up now, that is Chuck Schroedel sitting in the car 63 years after he sat in the car in the Le Mans pit. And that was at Armonk, New York. And what we tried to do, being a bunch of goofball amateur photographers, we tried to recreate that picture with that picture.
Well, Dominic, you've become part of this cast of characters of the Camaradi story, but it begs the question, what are some of the future plans for the car? You're its caretaker, you're its custodian now. Where is it going to be shown? Are you driving it? What are you doing with it? What's the future of the car?
I do every now and again try and take it for a little ride, but it's not registered. Try and keep that to a minimum. It's a lot of fun driving the car. It's really a lot of fun. We're going to be at the Boston Concourse up in Boston, Massachusetts with the car. And then we're going to be at the Newport Concourse up in Newport, Rhode Island. Maybe if everything works out according to plan, it may be on a long-term display at a pretty prestigious museum.
One in Kentucky?
Yeah, I think it's down in Kentucky.
That was actually going to be my next question, whether or not it was going to end up at the National Corvette Museum or not, which would be absolutely epic ending for this car. Not an ending, but a resting place.
Yes. I could use a little bit of a rest. We had a very hectic show season this year. If everything comes together and all the stars are aligned, and I've agreed to bring it down. It all depends on whether we could work the details out with the museum.
Loren and Dom have kept this thing going. And thanks to Dom, I went with him on a weekend to Watkins Glen, to the museum where the car was on display. And that's where I met Richard. And I saw the reception of the car at the museum at Watkins Glen. And I have to tell you, I can't thank Dom enough for what he's doing with that car. It's unbelievable.
In this crazy story of the restoration of the car and the cast of the characters, and we've kind of glossed over some things, and I urge people to go back and listen to a longer presentation that you guys did with the IMRRC as part of this summer's center conversation, where you, Richard, and Chuck go into way more detail about even the discovery of the car and things like that. One of the things I took away from that presentation was the original motor is lost at sea somewhere off the coast of Australia, but I went back to the other Camoradi Corvette. When I was listening to that part of the story, when it burned to the ground and all these kinds of things, it reminded me of other cars that have suffered from catastrophic fires. Even last year at Car Week, there was a Ferrari that was found in a barn that had suffered from a fire, and somebody was going to put it back together and this and that. Has there been any talk to find the other Camaradi Corvette? Does anybody know where it is? Does it still exist anymore, or was it crushed? What's its story?
I did ask Fred Gamble about it in 1960 after the fire at Sebring. The best of his recollection at this point was it was a total loss and discarded or scrapped or whatever.
Or maybe that lucky person still has it in a barn, just like the number 4, right?
Could be.
You never know.
That's actually the reason that the Cunningham crew was able to crew 3 cars at Le Mans, is because the 3 car took the place of the second Camaradi car. It was originally it was laid out to be 2 Cunningham cars, the 1 and 2, and 3 and 4 would have been the 2 spots for Camaradi. But when they lost the car at Sebring, I guess either Ed Cole or Zora Duntov or whatever kind of got annoyed with Lloyd, Lucky. Instead of replacing a car to the Camaradi team, they worked out a 3rd car to the Cunningham team. And if you look at the serial numbers of the 4 cars, the 1 and 2 are kind of similar. The 4 car is kind of similar, and the 3 car which was the one that replaced the Camaradi 3 car, is way out of sequence from the other cars.
So as we move into the final piece of this, we actually have a question from the crowd, and this is for the panel. And Terry writes, with the focus being on this wonderful era of Corvette, do you gentlemen have any thoughts on Corvette's conversion or transition to the modern day mid-engine car? Should they have continued their legacy of the front engine design that started with cars like the Camoradi Corvette? Does it feel right to have gone in this distinctive difference that we have now? What do you guys think about modern Le Mans and Team Corvette and racing and all those kinds of things? And I'll start with Chuck, because I know you have some opinions about this.
I can appreciate what everybody is going through that owns a Corvette, because when I got my 56 Corvette, the only thing I could not do was get the car into bed with me. I was so in love with that car. I was part of it until I sold my racing car business, and I sold the car probably in 74, which was a big mistake. But I loved that car. I loved everything about it. I did everything to it. I consider myself a past true Corvette owner, so I can appreciate.
Dominic, your thoughts on modern Corvette racing compared to the Camaradi Corvette?
One of the things that we're trying to work out with the National Corvette Museum is if I'm fortunate enough to be able to display the Camaradi car, I'm trying to work out a museum delivery of a new C8. You know, maybe we can get them both at the National Corvette Museum at the same time, the old GT style C1 car and delivery of the new C8.
We need a Camaradi tribute car at the next Le Mans. That's what we really need. Somebody needs to do a livery.
Yeah, that would be cool. Maybe we could turn the new C8 they take delivery of at the museum into a Camaradi tribute car. Never know.
So, Richard, you're still involved with General Motors. What are your thoughts on modern day Team Corvette racing?
I could probably speak for a week in answering that question. A change is often disruptive, and for a lot of people, it's traumatic, especially when it pertains to something that they're super passionate about. I've enjoyed the great privilege of working for a lot of different car companies. The bulk of my work has been for General Motors, but I've done photography for just about all of the world's major car makers, including a lot of the iconic performance brands like Aston Martin and Audi and Bentley and Ferrari and Mercedes and Porsche. Every brand has its enthusiasts, but I really do believe that no group is as intense and as passionate and fiercely loyal as is the Corvette lovers. When people are so personally, emotionally invested and so passionate about something, change can be a big issue. And this has been the case all along in Corvette's history. My Corvette journey began 50 years ago. I can say from my own experience and even from my understanding of Corvette history prior to that, that every major change has been disruptive and it has caused turmoil when they went from open headlights to rotating headlights. And then when they went from pop-up headlights back to open headlights, even when the shape of the tail lamps changed recently, it was a big problem for a lot of people. Of course, some people like the change. No change has been quite so profound, of course, as the change to the mid-engine car, which came with a C8 introduced in 2020. It is a big disruptor. It not only completely changes the architecture of the car, but it really profoundly changes the appearance. It goes from that traditional front-engine GT look with the long nose and the cockpit set back to a mid-engine look, the engine behind the passengers, and it changes the proportions of the cars quite dramatically. So I understand why some people don't like it, and I also appreciate why some people are in love with it. Inevitably, we can't deny the laws of physics, and it was just that. It was the laws of physics that propelled the change, and also the march of technology that allowed it. Chevrolet explored mid-engine architecture as far back as the late 1950s, and on a relatively low-volume car like Corvette, it was just simply not feasible, economically, logistically, technologically feasible. But today, with computer-aided design and 3D printing and the incredible advances in technology, it is feasible, and the front engine architecture really reached the limits of its performance potential with the C7. So it was inevitable. It was the only way forward if Corvette is going to keep moving forward. As far as the racing goes, I've been with the modern Corvette race program since its inception in 1997 when they began testing. I can say, in my opinion, the Corvette race program today is in the best place it's ever been. And that's simply because of the transition to the GT3 platform. Previously, the cars that raced in one place weren't homologated to race in another place, and it was prohibitively expensive to build 2 or 3 different versions of the same race car. Finally, the manufacturers and the sanctioning bodies have come together. Now, GT3 is the specification for production-based GT racing around the world. So GT3 homologated cars, which the C8RZ06 is, are eligible to race in every major sports car racing series around the world. So that, together with the change in Chevrolet's business model, they've gone from a full factory program, which is what it's been for the past 27 years, they've gone to a customer-based program. Chevrolet is partnering with different teams in different series around the world and supporting those teams, but the teams have more autonomy and are acting more independently. That business model, in conjunction with the GT3 specification and its eligibility, has resulted in more Corvettes racing in more places around the world than ever before. This year, that includes 2 different teams in IMSA, a team in WEC, a team in the SRO, and next year, I'm not at liberty to say exactly where and who, but I'll say that there will be even more Corvettes racing in even more places around the world. So if you're a Corvette race fan, putting aside preferences for the aesthetic and so on, the good news is there are more Corvettes racing in more places than ever before, and moving forward, that is only going to grow even further. Wherever you are in the world, whatever race series is your favorite, you are likely to eventually see Corvettes, and when I say eventually, it's going to be sooner than later, racing in that series. From my perspective, I love the fact that there are more teams racing more Corvettes than ever before.
And on that, I want to turn the microphone over to ACO USA President David Lowe for some closing thoughts.
What an incredible evening. Thank you, Eric, for pulling this together, and to Richard and Dominique and to Chuck. It's an honor to have you contribute to this very, very important program for the ACO USA members. For me, it was very enlightening. I really enjoyed the story. And again, I look forward to a chance to meet you all, possibly up at Watkins Glen here in the near future. Thank you.
Tonight's episode was brought to you in part by the International Motor Racing Research Center, whose charter is to collect, share, and preserve the history of motorsports and stories like those of the Camoradi Corvette. The IMRRC's collection embodies the speed, drama, and camaraderie of amateur and professional motor racing throughout the world, and it welcomes serious researchers and the casual fans alike to share stories of race drivers, race series, and race cars captured on their shelves and walls and brought to life through a regular calendar of public lectures and special events. To learn more, be sure to check out www.racingarchives.org or follow them on social media at IMRRC. And on behalf of everyone here and those listening at home, thank you for sharing your stories with us. And we hope you enjoyed this presentation and look forward to more Evenings with a Legend throughout the season. Dominic, Richard, and Chuck, thank you all for spending your evening with us and sharing this most interesting corner of Le Mans history with us, a story that probably many haven't heard but are going to repeat from this point forward. And Dominic, a special hats off to you for being the continued custodian of such an interesting piece of Le Mans history.
Thanks, Eric. And again, thanks to the International Motor Racing Research Center at Watkins Glen and the ACO for inviting us. It's an honor for me.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.
What if there was a better way to manage, preserve, certify, share, and transfer the history of your classic vehicle throughout its lifetime? Steeped in the latest technology, the Motor Chain, founded by computer scientist and car enthusiast Julio Saiz, aims to satisfy that very need. The Motor Chain connects collector car owners with professionals and buyers, allowing all parties to participate in a vehicle's documentation and history. Interactions and transfers are controlled and regulated with blockchain technology, securing trust in the documentation and the vehicle's provenance. With the Motor Chain, you'll never have to wonder about the health and status of your vehicles. To learn more, log on to www.themotorchain.com or follow them on social media at The Motor Chain on Facebook, X, and LinkedIn, or at TheMotorChain_TMC_ on Instagram. And be sure to check out their YouTube channel as well.
Acquiring a vintage car is easy, but what happens to that timeless car when the owner passes away? CARnection aims to help families with an important part of their estate that frequently gets overlooked. CARnection was founded by collector car industry veteran Jim Cruz of Classic Auto Insurance to help steer classic car owners towards a succession plan that's as unique as their collection. CARnection works with car collectors and their legal advisors or financial partners to create a roadmap for each car. This includes any historic documentation, which is then digitally stored in the owner's virtual garage app, including videos from the owners showing special features of their cars. CARnection's goal is to offer confidential, objective, up-to-the-minute market information to help you decide on a succession plan for your collection. Learn more at www.CARnectionAdvisors.com.
This episode has been brought to you by the Automobile Club of the West and the ACO USA. From the awe-inspiring speed demons that have graced the track to the courageous drivers who have pushed the limits of endurance, the 24 Hours of Le Mans is an automotive spectacle like no other. For over a century, the 24 Hours of Le Mans has urged manufacturers to innovate for the benefit of future motorists, and it's a celebration of the relentless pursuit of speed and excellence in the world of motorsports. To learn more about or to become a member of the ACO USA, look no further than www.lemans.org. Click on English in the upper right corner, and then click on the ACO Members tab for club offers. Once you've become a member, you can follow all the action on the Facebook group ACO USA Members Club and become part of the legend with future Evening with the Legend meetups. This episode has been brought to you by Grand Touring Motorsports as part of our Motoring Podcast Network. For more episodes like this, tune in each week for more exciting and educational content from organizations like the Exotic Car Marketplace, the Motoring Historian, Break Fix, and many others. If you'd like to support Grand Touring Motorsports and the Motoring Podcast Network, sign up for one of our many sponsorship tiers at www.patreon.com/GT Motorsports. Please note that the content, opinions, and materials presented and expressed in this episode are those of its creator, and this episode has been published with their consent. If you have any inquiries about this program, please contact the creators of this episode via email or social media as mentioned in the episode.